Hey guys, how are you doing? This is Zeb from Zed Outdoors and I hope you're having an awesome day. So today I've come back down to see Nick McMillen, who's a professional full-time craftsman and artist. And he's based here in his workshop in Hampshire, which is a county on the south coast of England. This workshop he also shares with his wife, who's also a professional full-time craftswoman and also basket maker. Now what this video is, this is part 2 of a 3-part series I'm filming with Nick on cedar bark basketry. In the first video, what we looked at in a lot of detail was the process for actually harvesting cedar bark in preparation for what we're about to do now, which is the processing of cedar bark. In the final video, the 3rd installment, Nick will be demonstrating in detail how to actually use the material we're going to process in this video to then actually weave a basket. If you haven't seen the previous video, then check the link below in the description. We'll link to that, and also we'll link to the 3rd and final video in this series as well. Now, there's a couple of things to kind of bear in mind before we get straight into the meat and bones of this video. Number one, Nick has actually only just at the time of filming this video published a ebook, a very comprehensive ebook on all aspects of cedar bark basketry. So he's taken a lot of what we've covered in the first video, this second video and the 3rd video, and he's also expanded upon that with a lot of custom illustrations that he's done himself. So think of that ebook as an accompaniment to this entire series. If you wish to support Nick's work and also learn a lot more about this topic of cedar bark basketry, I will put a link below in the description and also pinned to the top of the comments where you can go and access your own copy. Also, secondly, I will be putting a link to Nick's social media and website where you can find out a lot more information about the work that he does. He teaches as well as takes commission, as well as selling kind of prints, etc. of all the work that he does. So like I said in this video, we're going to talk through step by step the process that Nick uses for processing the cedar bark. One thing I will finally stress is that it's important to understand everything we covered in the first video to get to this point. So it's kind of a natural progression. So if you wish to kind of pause this video and go back to the first video to kind of understand where we're up to, then that'll be awesome to do. So you understand what we're going to be doing now from this point forwards. So Nick, with your kind permission, we'll begin. So guys, I hope you enjoyed the rest of this video where Nick McMillen is going to be teaching you how to process cedar bark for basketry. So Nick, before we begin, would you like to bring people briefly up to scratch in terms of what we covered in the first video and subsequently what we're going to be working with now?
Sure. So in the first video we were harvesting our bark straight from the tree, and then after that we removed the outer bark, which has to be done as soon as the bark comes off the tree when the bark's still nice and wet. And what that does is it gives us this material. So this was harvested off those trees, and it's still quite supple. This hasn't dried out fully yet, okay? And what we need to do is dry this bark fully because it will shrink quite a lot the first time it dries, okay? So here I've got a little bit of bark. I mean, this is over probably last year's harvest, I think, and you can see, you know, that's fully dry. Yeah, there's no moisture left in that. So I now know that this bark has shrunk as much as it's going to. Okay, so when we make our basket, it's not going to end up loose. What I need to do now is soften this to make it weavable. Okay, there's no way I'm going to be able to process this and weave with it. So what we have to do is we have to re-soak the bark, and what we're doing, we're trying to strike a balance here. We're trying to soak the bark enough so it's pliable and supple enough to work with. But what we don't want to do is bloat it and take it back to this original state where it's then going to shrink loads. Okay, so we're trying to find that sort of balance. And what I do is I soak it in really hot boiling water, basically. I find that hot boiling water it seems to penetrate a lot quicker and it sort of softens it a lot quicker than just sort of soaking it in cold water. And you kind of have a little bit more control over it. I find, you know, if it's quite thick bark and it's really bone dry, it's going to take maybe 10, 15, 20 minutes in hot water to sort of soften down to where we want it. Thinner stuff, this is actually quite thin. This will probably take, 5-10 minutes to soak. What you can then do is actually take the bark out and just leave it to rest for half an hour, 20 minutes, half an hour. Something called mellowing. Kind of what's going on there is there's still moisture in the bark that's trying to penetrate into the middle. So just leaving it to rest for that sort of 20 minutes, half an hour is just allowing the bark to fully soften down. Okay. So yeah, we'll get this in some hot water and we'll get going. So what we've got here, we've got a jam pot, just on a little element, and we've got inside some bark that we've had going for a while. It's been in there about 20 minutes. This is really thick bark actually, you can sort of see how thick that is, but also it's quite hot, but you can see it's quite supple now. That was really, really rigid. So that's in a good place. So I'm just going to fish that out. You have to mind your fingers here. I'm just going to let it drain and cool off for a couple of ticks. But yeah, that's good. And then what we're going to do is we're going to cut this into strips, the size of strips that we want for a basket. And then we're going to splice that thickness down even more, because this is really thick stuff. So we'll take that back over to our table. Okay. So while that's just cooling off, I'll talk about a few different methods for actually cutting your bark into strips. So obviously, pair of scissors you can use. I used to use, a steel ruler and a craft knife. Which is great if you're just doing sort of small projects. As I started moving on to bigger projects, I started employing some techniques that the First Nation people use from Canada and America. So post-contact, after Europeans had got there, they got their hands on razor blades. They used to put these razor blades in blocks of wood, and they used to carve the blocks into beautiful sort of animal shapes, whales and bears and stuff like that. But what that gave you was essentially like a block of wood with a loads of blades sticking out the bottom, 3 or 4. And then they would run that block down the strip of bark. So you're cutting, 3-4 strips at the same time. So, quite labour saving. Since then, I've moved on to something like this. So this is called it's for cutting strips in leather. And you can see there's a couple of razor blades set in there, and you can actually sort of set the blades to whatever width that you want. This is all in imperial, so we've got eighths of an inch, quarters, and then I've set these at 1/2 inch where I want them. And you can put quite a few razor blades in there at a time, and then you basically clamp that to a bench and then you drag your bark through it. So the thicker the bark, the more resistance it causes, so you can't cut loads of strips of thick bark at once. So that's why I've only got the two blades in there for this. Okay, so I've got my bark cutter set up here, just on a board, clamped to the board, and I'm going to run my bark through it. So this is all nice and soft. I'm just going to look down the bark, see if there's any issues. You see there, I've got a bit of a knot, so I'm going to start the other side to miss that knot, just because it causes some problems.
Just one question.
Yeah, sure.
Before ascertaining the actual width of the piece you're going to be kind of shaping up, what do people need to bear in mind? Is it a case of what they're subsequently going to weave that will dictate?
Yeah, no, that's a good point. So I'm a planner. I tend to know what I'm going to make before I make it. So for the basket we're going to make, I've got this little basket here. It's a little bias weave cedar bark, and this is made from 1/2 inch strip elements. Okay, 1/2 inch is quite a nice size to work with. You can make a fairly decent sized basket quite quickly, and also it's not too coarse. It's still got quite a nice bit of sort of craftsmanship to it. So a 1/2 inch strip is a good place to start. I tend to use, in most of the baskets I make now, sort of 1/4 inch strips. So going down, even finer. Just allows you to get that nice fine work in there. But yeah, by all means, you know, sort of start large. It's a good place to get your head around the techniques and then move on to some sort of thinner stuff. Okay, so let's just run this through the cutter. So we've got our blades there. You want to mind your fingers on that. Come a cropper there a few times. I'm not going to start right at the end because I want something to grab hold of. So I'm just going to come in a few inches and just bed it down. And as I pull it through, I'm keeping this edge here flush with this edge of the cutter just to make sure that this inner strip stays the nice width. This is cutting pretty well considering its thickness. Sometimes it takes me and Molly pulling and pushing to get the stuff through. It's actually doing pretty good. And it is a case of just feeding it through, and you can see there cutting our strips nicely. And you can imagine, you know, you get some slightly thinner bark and more blades, you're cutting 4 strips at a time. It just saves a huge amount of work. There we go, near the end. That's a little bit. So now I'll just come back up the end. I'm just gonna, you can sometimes just peel these end bits and just follow the grain down. Okay, so we now have 2 half-inch strips. It's pretty long stuff as well. There's a lot of material there. So now we've done that, we can move on to our next stage. As we saw, you know, this bark is really thick. You could weave a basket with it, but it's going to be really coarse. You know, you're not going to get a nice tight weave with this stuff because it's too thick. So what we can do is we can actually split it down its width. That serves 2 purposes. It's given us some nice thinner material, which is going to help us get a nice tight weave to our basket. It's also doubling our material, which is brilliant. You know, you go to all this trouble to harvest this stuff, and then yeah, you're just sort of doubling all the material you've got. So to do that, I'm just going to clean this end off. It's quite a ragged end, so just snip it off. You can see the thickness of the bark there. I'm going to embed a knife just through the width of that, like that. Just be careful doing this. I'm not pushing the knife towards me here, I'm just wiggling it, so it looks worse than it is. I've just started that split, like so. And now we're going to use our technique of just separating these 2 layers all the way down. Now at this stage you'll feel if the bark isn't soaked enough because it will start cracking. You'll just hear it going. And that kind of means that the water, this moisture hasn't penetrated right to the centre of the bark where you're actually splitting it into. If you do hear that, just bung it back into soak again for another 10 minutes. But this is lovely. And it's got really, cedar bark's quite unique among the tree barks. That's really nice kind of leathery, sort of supple texture to it. It's lovely stuff to work with. Alright, so we've just got a little problem bit here. Let's just make sure we don't, you can see there the grain's just running out. So I'm just going to come in with my knife and split that. Separate that bit. And then I can run that bit back in. So it is just looking out for those little key points. And again, with any splitting of natural fibres or timber, you're just trying to keep that split run down the middle. This is just splitting beautifully, it's following that one layer. But if it does start to run off, you want to pull down on the thicker side, because the split will always run to the thinner side. And this is something, you know, when I plan a project, if I'm weaving a big mat or big basket, I'll work out how much I need, what materials, then I'll just sort of sit at the kitchen table with a glass of wine, and that's me for the evening. I love it. It's a really sort of mindful process, real sort of therapeutic just get in a good headspace and split away. So there we go, getting down, near the end. Just run off a little bit there. Just pick that up.
So it's being constantly mindful as you kind of separate it.
Yeah, my fingers pick up a lot. I'm feeling a lot when I go, and I'm just constantly watching that split and this sort of back edge. And yeah, any little problems, I stop, deal with them. You know, if you ignore them, the bark will run out. There we go, all the way down. So if we look at that material there, we could split that down again. Might be pushing my luck, but you know, depends what you're doing. I would probably have a go at splitting that down again. Let's have a go. So got my knife halfway across the width, just wiggle it, not pushing it. Separate the two layers, and off we go again. Now this is where it starts becoming more crucial, watching that split, because you've got less bark to play with. The first problem bit. So just separate those two bits. So this is where I'm really concentrating on it. You see there where I'm pulling it really hard down, that means I'm pulling more that side. I can just see that the bark's a little bit thinner this way, so I'm pulling more on the thicker side. And I'll keep doing that. You can see that it's just a little bit thicker until I'm confident that.
So for the purposes of basketry, why is it important to make sure you get the thicknesses as even as possible?
It'll just, you know, I guess it's the same with all craft work, isn't it? You know, the preparation of your material is kind of key to the finished product. The better your materials are prepared, the more even everything is, the more, you know, neat and tidy and the same everything is. It's just going to add to that sort of finished product. Everything's going to look the same. It's all going to kind of combine together to make this sort of, you know, unified thing. It's something I spend a lot of time on, is my preparation. It drives my wife bonkers, but there we go, we run out, we lost it there. But that's not, you know, that's a pretty good stretch. I'd be able to cut some elements out of that. Some fairly thin stuff. That's pretty good. So yeah, as I said, I'm a real planner. I like to know what I'm doing from the outset, mainly just because I can then just prepare the bark I need, the materials I need. I think personally it sort of, you know, it allows me not to waste material. It takes so much effort to prepare this stuff and get it ready for weaving. I hate wasting it. I mean, I will keep anything up to sort of 6-8 inches long. I'll just bundle everything up into grades of size. And, you know, the smaller the bit, the smaller the basket. Just make tiny wee little baskets with the smaller stuff. But yeah, I hate wasting it. So yeah, that's great. You know, we've got our weaving material here. That's ready to go to make a basket. And we can dive into our project.
So there you have it, my friends. That is a wrap for this video where Nick McMillen has been showing you how to process cedar bark for weaving. As mentioned at the very beginning, this is part 2 of a 3-part series. In the previous video, the first video, we looked at in detail how to harvest cedar bark to get it up to the stage that we started at the beginning of this video. In this video, we looked at the whole processing of it. And now in the third and final video of this 3-part series, Nick is going to be teaching you how to actually now weave a basket as he showed just earlier on. So a couple of things to kind of wrap up on. Number one, As I mentioned at the very beginning, Nick has written and published a very detailed ebook talking about cedar bark basketry as a whole, talking about the harvesting, the processing and the weaving, and a myriad of other topics as well. If you wish to support Nick's work and learn more about cedar bark basketry, I would highly recommend you get yourself a copy of the ebook. And he's also done some custom illustrations as well that are amazing to look at. So what I'm going to do in the description below and pinned to the top of the comments, I'm going to put a link to that ebook. Secondly, I'm also going to put a link to Nick's social media and website. If you gain any value from this video whatsoever, it will mean the world to me to head over to Nick's Instagram and social media and to give him a follow. And finally, like I said, I will put a link below to the previous video and the next video as well to wrap up this 3-part series. So Nick, I really do appreciate you showing us the process. Guys, hope you enjoyed this video and I shall see you on the next installment. And without further ado, I hope whatever you're doing, you have a blessed day, a blessed week ahead. From Zed Outdoors and Nick McMillen, peace out.